This is Marine Interviewer Staff Sergeant John T. McDaniel, stationed at the Joint Informational Services Office, Camp Pendleton, California. Today for interview we have Marine Captain David G. Rogers, service number 093400, assigned to Headquarters Battery, 13th Marines, 5th Marine Division, Camp Pendleton, California. Captain Rogers was in Vietnam from September 14, 1966 to October 18, 1967, and was with Charlie Battery, 1st Battalion, 12th Marines, 3rd Marine Division, Fleet Marine Force. Captain Rogers, tell us about your experiences when you were in Vietnam.
When I first joined Charlie Battery, they were located at a place called GLN, and I was assigned by the commanding officer as a forward observer with my company, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. They were located at that time at the Rock Pile. I think my most vivid experience and encounter with North Vietnamese forces came on an operation around the area of Quai Son. This happened at approximately April 30th, 1967, in a battle for Hill 881. We were assigned by the commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, the objective of Hill 881, and we proceeded towards 881 around the middle, the latter part of the afternoon, around 1700, 29 April, and we settled down for the night about 600 or 700 meters from Hill 881. It was just beginning to get nightfall when we did settle down, and the commanding officer of my company at the time, Captain Bennett, called me over about 10 or 15 meters from, in other words, I was standing about 15 meters from him, and he called me over to him, and he said, "Look, Dave," he says, there's the North Vietnamese up on top of that hill up there. Get some arty up there real fast. So I think I fired about the fastest fire mission I ever fired in my life. I think we got rounds up there within a matter of 2 minutes or less. We had two batteries firing for us, and one battery was firing up on 881, and another battery was firing for me on another, you could more or less say an intermediate hill directly out to our west. We were firing on the intermediate hill at approximately 7 to 9 North Vietnamese located in bunkers about 300 meters out in front of us. And I can still remember real vividly the sound of the rounds coming over our heads. You could really hear them whistling. So we fired artillery on the hill, both hills as a matter of fact, throughout the entire night. And the company commander was constantly calling for more and more artillery on top of the hills. The next morning, we were, of course, had been assigned the mission of taking Hill 881, and I began prepping Hill 881 for an assault. Now, we didn't know exactly what was up on 881. It was a real deceiving place to be in. First of all, if somebody would have told me that there was an entire battalion of North Vietnamese up on top of the hill, I think I would have looked at them and told them they were crazy. First of all, you really couldn't see any signs of North Vietnamese up there. We knew there were people up there because we'd seen them the night before. However, like I say, a large unit, a battalion-sized unit up on top of that hill. I just couldn't imagine it. We could see some bunkers. I'd say at the very most I saw probably 5 bunkers at the very most. The rest were so well camouflaged, expertly camouflaged, that the average Marine couldn't see them unless he actually walked up on the position itself. I'd say the closest you could probably spot the bunkers would be from about anywhere from 30 to 40 meters. If you got that close, you might be able to spot the bunker if you were really looking for it. The lead rifle company started up on top of the hill, started up the hill, and of course I was with the company commander at the time, and I could monitor all radio transmissions that were being made from the lead platoon commander. They got about 3/4 of the way up the top of the hill. The lead, somebody, I say somebody, a North Vietnamese that is, threw a grenade at a couple Marines. And of course the Marines immediately opened up, and I think they did kill the man. But anyway, the platoon commander, Lieutenant Cruz, called back down to Captain Bennett and reported that it was light contact and that he was not having any problems that he could not handle at the time. The company commander instructed or ordered Lieutenant Cruz to keep pressing towards the top of the crest, the top of the hill. Lieutenant Cruz kept pushing his platoon to the top of the hill, got to the top of the hill, and moved in an easterly direction. The hill being running basically from east to west. At this time, Lieutenant Cruz started running into heavy opposition, and of course the stories later were very vivid by the platoon commander himself, as related to me just in more or less BS sessions. He started across the hill and received intense fire from the enemy, and we sent another platoon to help out Lieutenant Cruz. I think Lieutenant Hauser was the platoon commander at the time. The one comment here, the same way that the Marines went up and tried to come back down, it was very difficult for them to go back down the same way, because apparently the North Vietnamese had let them into more or less a pocket or into a circle, and the Marines never knew that the North Vietnamese were on the right flank while they were going up the hill. They never opened up. They had their fire discipline was outstanding. And like I say, the same way that the Marines went up, they tried to bring their dead and wounded back down the same way. And at this time, the North Vietnamese opened up and more or less strung the noose. And in all, there was a total of 27 Marines from my company killed and 51 wounded. I think we got back at that time 4 or 5 bodies. And the total number of Marines killed up on the hill itself, as far as I could tell in talking with the S2 officer after the battle, was 44 dead and over 100 wounded, all within a period of, say, 8 hours. I'm not sure exactly what was being said between the battalion commander and the company commander himself. I know for a fact that the company commander requested to be relieved I say relieved, I mean not in the sense of quitting his job, but asked for more or less reinforcements on top of the hill to help get his men off the hill, at least his wounded men, and possibly leave the dead up on top of the hill. I think he had to request this twice, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, on the second request, it was permission was granted to withdraw his forces. I say his forces being my company back, and with reinforcements coming up from Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines. And of course, Kilo Company lost, I think they lost some 17 men killed and about 30 or 40 wounded. And we retreated back off the hill, and while we were retreating, mortars were being fired upon this one LZ, a landing zone that we had set up to take our dead and wounded up to. North Vietnamese seemed to have almost zeroed in on the exact spot that the helicopters were landing. So actually, they were hitting short, about 100 meters, 100 to 200 meters short. Their range, they just couldn't seem to get quite enough range, possibly because of the maximum effective range of the weapon itself. But anyway, they moved the landing zone, and we proceeded to withdraw back to the landing zone, which was almost 1,000 meters to the north. As I said before, Kilo 39 tried to come up and relieve us, and as far as I know, their mission, at least in my way of thinking, and I'm not sure whether this is exactly right or not, but their mission was a relief force to try to come up and at least help us get our wounded off the hill, and hopefully to get the dead off the hill. And like I said before, there were, as far as I know, there was a total of 37 dead Marines left up on top of the hill. This was justified, as far as I was concerned. This was justified because, number one, in trying to get the dead off the hill, we would have encountered many more casualties. I can't say exactly how many casualties the North Vietnamese were taking, but I'm sure that it was on a man-for-man basis. However, in this situation, I don't think it was feasible, and I say that more or less as a personal opinion. But just from what I saw, I didn't think it was really feasible to go up there and to sacrifice other Marines to get dead Marines down off the hill, even though you are taught in basic training to never leave a dead Marine out on the field, if at all possible. So, like I say, there was a total of 37 dead Marines left up on top of the hill. I can still remember coming back. It was getting dark at the time, and there was a total of 3 units in the area: Mike 39, Kilo 39, and Mike 33. And there was lines of, more or less a line coming, like a line of ants, more or less, coming off, actually starting down at the foot of 881, going to the LZ itself. Marines who hadn't been shot or wounded in any way, carrying dead and wounded Marines back to the landing zone. And Marines, not totally disorganized, but people, it seemed quite strange to just see people coming up to you and asking you, "Where's Mike 39? where's Kilo 39? Where's Mike 33? It's just one thing that I know that I'll never forget. Seeing Marines just come out of a fight like that. After we pulled back, we bedded down in behind Mike 39. I say bedded behind. In other words, Mike 39 was between us and Hill 881. And I just started to dig my foxhole when I received a call, or at least our company commander received a call from the commanding officer of Mike Company, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, saying that he needed a forward observer because his forward observer had been killed. I don't know exactly when it happened, but he had been killed. So I went up to the Mike 39 position, and the same position that we had occupied, I say we being Mike 33, that we had occupied the night before. And I fired in night defensive fires for Mike 39, and actually Mike, I'll take that back. It was I think my correction, Mike 33 might have fired in their own night defensive fire, probably on the north side. I'm not sure about that, but I know I fired in night defensive fires for Mike 39 and stayed up the better part of the night. And we've constantly fired artillery up on 881, thinking that maybe they might be withdrawing, and if so, then we could possibly kill some of them as they were withdrawing. The next morning, I went back with Mike 33, and we moved on back in an easterly direction towards the battalion CP. Lieutenant Colonel Wilder was in command, Captain Stump acting as the S3 officer. They were located approximately, if I can remember just by sheer estimation, it would be probably 3,000 meters back to our rear. We moved on back to the battalion CP, immediately set up and reinforced their perimeter. And then, of course, most of the troops shaved after having not shaved for probably 2, maybe 3 days. After we'd gotten back to the battalion CP, the Mike Company was sent back to the rock pile. Helicopters came in about 3 hours after we had settled down, and everybody went back to the rock pile from my company except myself. The battalion commander was wanting an officer, FO, forward observer type, to stay out into the field and act as a forward observer with the command group. And also the battalion liaison officer, Lieutenant McDavid, was going to go on R&R about 4 or 5 days from that date, and the battalion commander was wanting to ensure himself that he did have a liaison officer around and with him at all times, and I was going to be the one to take over the responsibilities of liaison officer. So I stayed with the battalion command group for the duration of the entire operation. After my company was taken back, or even before my company was taken back, I think the planes actually came and started around 7 o'clock in the morning. I know it was pretty early in the morning. Bombing and blowing up, denuding Hill 881. They just started from one end, they just went clear to the other end. And after they got done, I just couldn't imagine that anything was alive up on top of that hill. I think they bombed it for a day, that day, and then for about 4 hours of the next day, at which time Mike Company, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, was given the job of going back up on 881 and retaking the hill. I say retake, it had actually never been taken by the Marines. So Mike 339 was sent back up the hill. They got up to the top of the hill, and I was monitoring the battalion command net, Lieutenant Colonel Wilder being in command of actually 4 rifle companies, Mike Company 33, Kilo 33, Mike Company 39, and Kilo 39, and having tactical control over Mike 39. I could monitor their transmissions back to the battalion commander. From what I could gather, there was only about, I'll say, 5 or 10 North Vietnamese left back up on 881, or either just stayed there or hadn't gotten with the group, so to speak, and retreated on back to towards Laos. So, like I say, light resistance, and maybe there was a few people killed. I never really heard how many North Vietnamese were killed by Mike 39, but it was a minimal amount. It's just probably 3 or 4 at the very most. There might have been 5 or 10 up there, but the most I heard that was killed after the hill was taken was about 3 or 4. And these were down in their bunkers and more or less acting, I guess, as snipers, more or less. Like I say, I was observing and monitoring the radio, observing from a distance of probably 2 or 3, about 2,500 meters. So I really couldn't get a bird's eye view of what was actually taking place. All I could do is just watch the Marines going up the hill. After Mike Company called over and said the entire objective had been secured, the Battalion CP moved on over, and this is one thing that I know I'll never forget in my life, is just getting over to 881 and seeing only one North Vietnamese body laying on the hill. One North Vietnamese body, and the rest of them were Marines. It was fairly obvious that the North Vietnamese had done a real good job just policing up the area, policing up their dead bodies and taking them on back towards the Laos. No rifles, no ammunition, no bodies, and just Marines that, as far as I could tell, hadn't been booby-trapped or anything. And I don't think there were any instances up on 81 of North Vietnamese tampering with Marine bodies, although there was supposedly one Marine booby-trapped up on the battle for Hill 861, which had occurred 4 or 5 days earlier. We set in, we dug foxholes, set in our perimeter. Battalion commander issued the order to set in a perimeter and possibly await a counterattack by the North Vietnamese. I fired in night defensive fires around the hill itself, got with the FOs of the two rifle companies that were up on the hill at the time, Kilo and Mike 39, and had them firing a couple night defensive fires so they would know the exact location of them also. remember, I think it was about two nights later. I'm not sure exactly how many nights later it was. Either 1 or 2 nights later. But he had 2-3 on our right flank. Understand that the operation itself was conducted by 2 battalions, 3-3, 2-3, each going through a zone, so to speak. And 3-3 being on the left flank and 2-3 being on the right flank. And at nighttime, it must have been about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. You could see tracers going off in the air, artillery being called in, and it's fairly obvious that 2-3 was under attack. It was determined later that actually these attackers had been coming back towards 881 South and were supposedly had the mission of retaking Hill 881 South, which at that time we were occupying. However, they were intercepted by Marine forces from 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. The battle that night, I think, just continued for, say, 3 hours, and I'm not sure who was the winner or who was the loser. At daybreak the next day, I'm not sure what was exactly happening on the 2-3 flank. But, we were sending out platoon-sized patrols anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 meters out, and actually never made any contact. As far as I know, we never made any contact after the actual assault on the hill itself. 2-3, however, was making contact farther out in a westerly direction from Hill 881 north, and I think one of their companies got bushwhacked, got in a big battalion-sized ambush, and I think they took 20 or 30 KIAs in that one bushwhacking.
Excuse me, sir. Going back to Hill 881, do you think that the M16 was effective and it did the job that it was designed for?
Now, I can still remember that letter being written to the congressman, and of course there was quite a bit said about that. And I try to recall my experiences up on Hill 881 South in connection with the M16 rifle, but I can't really remember hearing of any occasion where these rifles were jamming. Now, I can remember coming back off the hill, sitting down with the company commander, getting his platoon commanders, platoon sergeants together, and recalling what had actually happened up on the hill, and more or less for intelligence information for the S2 and the battalion commander himself. But all during the discussion, that particular discussion, I can't remember anybody saying anything about his M16 stopping up. And even even later on, after maybe a month or so after we'd gotten back to the Rockville, I still, just in talking with some of the troops and everything, that wasn't one of the specific questions that I had asked anybody, and I really can't recall of instances of the M16 actually jamming up on Hill 881. I never heard anybody actually comment on it. I know down around Kalu, which was I think July 20th, 1967, the North Vietnamese set up a battalion-sized ambush down around the area of Kalu, actually between Kalu and Quezon along Route 9. And I can remember a lieutenant doing more or less a little investigation on the M16 rifle, and he had written statements from Marines who had M16s jam up on him. And if I can recall, he had about 7 or 8 statements there from the Marines, and I'm not sure of the disposition of the investigation itself, whether he actually made a written investigation, but I know he did have these written statements from these various Marines stating that they did have malfunctions with the M16 rifle during this battalion-size ambush set up by the North Vietnamese. That's the only time that when I was in Vietnam that I can remember anybody having any type of malfunction with the M16 rifle.
You feel that the main reason that the NVA inflicted so many casualties on the Marines was that they was waiting for them, was prepared to defend this hill?
Well, they were definitely prepared to defend the hill itself. They had bunkers up there. They had over 200 bunkers up there. And the amazing thing about this is that even after a day and a half to 2 days of air bombardment, when we got back up on top of the hill and actually set up our battalion CP up there and set up our perimeter, there were 75 bunkers remaining. So this gives you an idea of how strong these bunkers were and how numerous they were. I know that the battalion commander slept in one bunker. There was a big bomb crater right beside it, and you just look inside of his bunker and tell that it had been dented. And it's hard to really say how long the bunkers were actually up there. Maybe 3 to 4 weeks. But they were well-constructed bunkers and well-camouflaged. The camouflage was the big thing. Like I said, the camouflage was the big thing. It's just amazing that the only way a Marine could, you actually couldn't see the bunkers themselves. Like I said, if you were about 30 meters away from the bunker, really looking for it, you could see it. But I think in most cases, the Marines, before they could actually even kill the North Vietnamese themselves, actually take the bunker, was that they had to run up to the bunker actually and try to toss a grenade in there. And by this time, if a Marine had gotten, say, 15, 10, 5 meters away from a bunker, of course he got his head blown off. This was another thing that was well, at least pertinent in the battle itself, was that everybody, and I say everybody, I mean almost everybody, at least 9/10 of them, were shot from the waist up. And in a lot of cases, they were shot right in the face, or in the head, or in the arm, or right in the chest, indicating, to me at least, that the North Vietnamese are pretty good marksmen. They weren't aiming to maim or to injure. They were aiming to kill. And I think the most difficult thing for the Marines to do up there was to get to the bunkers themselves. I can still recall some of the stories that they had, Marines, coming off the hill, saying how they did take a bunker and everything. But, this was the more or less the cruel part about it. In other words, there was no fair play, and the North Vietnamese stayed pretty much in their bunkers, just taking pop shots, very accurate pop shots at the Marines as they moved up and across the hill and in their retreat back down the hill. Like I said before, the Marines actually never took the hill. There were just not enough Marines up there to take the hill. They did a tremendous job, a very gallant job, of moving across the hill. However, they were just sustaining too many too many casualties to keep up their attack, more or less, up on top of the hill itself. And even with reinforcements coming up and trying to help out the Marines who were up on top of the hill, either dead or alive, I don't know how many more people would have been killed, but there would have been quite a few more, because the North Vietnamese were positioned there, well camouflaged, well defended, and they were strictly at an advantage during the battle itself. Another point is that the artillery in the prep fires that I fired the day, at least the morning of the day of the attack, did not help out in the least bit. After looking at the bunkers themselves after the battle, 3 or 4 days after the battle, actually going down and physically inspecting the bunkers themselves, they were 2 or 3 feet thick, maybe 2, maybe 3 layers of logs, and of course they were within trees, located within trees, so that when an artillery round came out, more likely, or came down, it more likely hit the top of the tree and exploded right in the tree itself, or it might have come down and actually lit right on the bunker itself. But still, even if it did hit the bunker, seriously doubt if anybody inside would have been killed, especially with a 105 round. A 155 probably would have given them a headache. 8-inch howitzer, still, as explosive as it is, and as much as it is used against bunkers, still in the terrain, in the foliage and everything, there wouldn't have been very many people killed up on the hill itself, at least the people in the bunkers. It's unfortunate that we didn't have, at that time, an 8-inch howitzer battery at Khe Sanh. I think we did have 2 105 batteries, and I think there was 2 155 howitzers with each firing battery, although I'm not sure of that.
Excuse me, sir. How effective was the airstrike that they ran for this day and a half on Hill 881?
The airstrikes themselves were real effective. I say real effective because that's the only way that the Marines actually took the hill. In other words, the bombardment, the napalm seemed to take quite a heavy toll, or at least they were really blowing the hill up. And I don't know myself, and I don't think anybody knows, but I would surely like to know exactly the time that the North Vietnamese did leave the hill. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, if they left the night of the battle, or the next day, or the next night, now, depending on when they left, like I say, the next day, we just completely blew up that hill, denuded the whole thing, well, at least the cap of it, and part of the siding. But I'm not sure whether we wasted millions of tons of ordnance up on top of that hill the next day, and it still raises the question in my mind: is when did they leave? Because I can still remember sitting there watching them blow up that hill, and just couldn't believe that people would stay there. They were either hardheads or idiots or something. I just couldn't believe that the North Vietnamese would stay there on top of that hill. And of course, a day and a half, 2 days later, when Mike 39 did go up there was, of course, only a small element remaining back up on top of the hill.
The battalions didn't try to completely surround Hill 881, or could you, to cut off their escape?
At that time, I think it was unfeasible for them to try to cut off their escape. Now, I think the way we approached the hill was about, well, of course, it's a matter of maybe debate, but it was the quickest way to the hill, we'll say it that way. I think we took a sort of a south, maybe southwesterly direction towards the hill itself. We possibly could have gone and headed south for maybe, or straight south, maybe for 2,000 or 3,000 meters, which was completely downhill, and then start back up the hill from the east end. Maybe we could have done it this way. And I think, just from personal opinion and experience, there is an experience factor in this, that if we would have done it that way, I don't think as many Marines would have been killed. But it was the long way around, we'll put it that way. And the most direct route to the hill itself was the one that we took. I don't know whether they knew which way we were going to go up the hill. I mean, we were on the more or less the north side of it the day before, the night before, and the morning of the day of the attack. But still, any way that we would have went up, they had the hill pretty well defended, and it's just really hard to say which. If we would have gone about it another way. The North Vietnamese, like I say, their fire discipline was outstanding in the fact that they did get the Marines surrounded, or at least led them into the trap itself, and then started picking them off one by one. So, as far as that goes, of course, tactics is tactics. My way of viewing tactics is that when you're going through school, you run a problem, nobody gets hurt. When you're in combat and you run a problem the right way or the wrong way, somebody gets hurt. And that's tactics. Prior to our even departing Quezon, they were planning more or less their means of attack, particularly at this time up on Hill 861. Marines actually hadn't got to the top of the hill, and we had just arrived out of Quezon, and the battalion commander went down, and in a briefing with the regimental commander and his S3 officer, there was more or less two plans of attack up on, strictly at this time was Hill 861, because it, of course, had been determined basically by an ambush from a 9th Marines platoon that had been out on 861 a few days earlier, that there were definitely North Vietnamese in the area, and that they were up on 861. Nobody, of course, knowing the tactical situation up on hills 881 south and 881 north. Maybe somebody did know, but at least we never heard anything about it. Possibly through photographs and aerial observation, maybe they determined there was something up there. I never heard anything about that, though. But there was two plans of attack, and the first one was more or less a straight ground attack, going straight up 861 and taking it more or less by brute force, not actually brute force, but by using supporting arms to the maximum, and then utilizing the individual Marine. And there was also a plan where helicopters would drop off Marines to the southwest and to the northwest of 861 and come in and converge on it more or less from three sides. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe, pretty sure of this plan of attack. At least I know that we were scheduled on a secondary plan to be helicoptered in to the southwest of 861. And then, of course, moving, converging in three directions up on 861. Well, this would have put us very close to Hill 881. And I think one of the reasons I'm alive today is because we didn't utilize this plan of attack, this helicopter assault, so to speak. Because I can still remember the company commander coming down, pinpointing on his map where we were supposed to land. And I'm not sure exactly how close it was to 881, but I know just by traveling through the area a couple of days later that it was pretty infested with North Vietnamese. So I'm more or less glad for myself, well, actually glad for other Marines too, that we didn't utilize this one plan of attack. We just went straight up it. When we first started off towards 861, my company was in the rear pretty much all the way, and we got up on top of 861, and of course my company hadn't seen any combat as of yet. All they heard was mortar rounds going off and machine gun fire, etc. But if we got up on 861, we headed kind of in a southwesterly direction. At this time, the commanding officer of 3rd Battalion gave the order for my company to move out to the lead, since basically it was the strongest company at that time. In other words, it hadn't sustained any other any casualties, while the other companies had sustained fairly numerous casualties. I don't want to say heavy or light or anything, because it gets into a debate when you want to speak in terms of light, medium, and heavy casualties. But, of course, I've already described what we did after we were given an order to move from the battalion CP area on over to this other hill and occupy it for the night, and then of course the next day being our objective being 881. On approximately 12 May, it's either 12 May or 14 May, I'm pretty sure it was an even number, we were relieved up on the hill itself by, I believe, the 1st Battalion 26th Marines. I can still remember waking up early in the morning, just right at daybreak, cracking one can of C rations, putting on our gear, destroying all bunkers, basically mostly by hand. And I don't think any of them were actually blown up, although some of them were blown up a couple of days, day before. Actually blown up with C4. And we began our long march back down to Khe Sanh. I think it probably was all 7,000 or 8,000 meters back to Khe Sanh. Anyway, we had to be there by, I think, 1300. The trucks would be there waiting for us and would take us on back to the rock pile. We got down to Khe Sanh around, it must have been 1100, 11:15 in the morning. And the first thing that the battalion commander received was a congratulatory note from the commanding officer of the 3rd Marine Regiment on the more or less a well done job on top of up on Hill 881 and 861. I say 861 because a company, Kilo 33, had taken, or not had taken, but had tried or attempted to take Hill 861, and it received numerous casualties up on that hill. So there was beer waiting. I think they gave about 2 cans of beer per man, 2 cans of soda pop. We sat there, we drank it, and then all around 1400, we hopped back on the trucks and went on back to the Rock Pile. Weary Marines indeed. As far as the individual Marine goes, I think I learned to respect the individual Marine, the 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, more in this one particular battle than any other time that I've been in the Marine Corps. He was given a job. He went up in the face of danger, in the face of just being blown away, more or less, and he went up and did his job. To see the faces of Marines dragging back their dead buddies, their wounded buddies, you could see how close that the Marines really were with each other. It was a true brotherhood, and I was really proud of the conduct of the Marines. Which brings up another point. I've never seen a Marine run in combat, and of course, being in that battle itself, being more or less a historical battle. Of course, I didn't witness any cowardliness of the Marines itself, which more or less goes clear back to the day that the individual Marine enters Marine Corps, where he's taught discipline and where he's taught to obey orders from superior personnel. As far as the tactics go, in the assault on the hill itself, it was debatable. I still, at this time, don't know whether the company commander, even though I was with him at all times, was ordered to keep committing his troops up the hill. But even if he was, still, the Marines had worked themselves into a position where it was inescapable, more or less. So probably by the time the battalion commander really realized what was actually happening up on top of that hill, it was really too late for him to make a sound tactical decision on a way to take the hill itself. But maybe one of the things we can learn from this battle itself is that of course, the North Vietnamese are experts at camouflage and jungle fighting, more or less. Although we weren't actually in jungle, but it was canopy, trees, vegetation. Maybe we could emphasize that there are people deceiving enough to actually are capable of hiding from you. That sounds strange in a way, but the North Vietnamese did a work of art, more or less, I think, up on 881, in that they never, you just couldn't tell they were up there. And what we could recommend for training purposes, I don't really offer any solution. I don't actually know one, except that the individual Marine's got to be taught that, by golly, when he's looking, he's got to look hard, and he's got to want to find him. Otherwise, if you just go about it more or less in a nonchalant way, which I think might have possibly been part of the problem up on 881 itself, where Marines really weren't playing heads-up ball, so to speak, and when they finally did realize what was going on, actually getting shot at, then it was more or less a little bit too late. There were supposedly trails, little or just foot trails up on top of the hill that you could actually see, and this should have led the individual Marine. I say individual Marine. It doesn't take a real smart person to see that if a trail's up along a hill right there, somebody's probably more than likely been using that trail. So, if you just to pay attention to more or less to detail, to the unnaturalness of the terrain itself, when it comes to a little, more or less a mound on the earth where it shouldn't be, and a little trail going, or maybe 2 or 3 trails going in different directions. It should lead the individual Marine to really open up his eyes and start really looking, because if there's any signs of life up there, I guarantee you, in that kind of country, it's going to be North Vietnamese. That's about the extent of my experiences up on Hill 881. After that, I was transferred around August 18th or 20th to Alpha Battery, 1st Battalion, 13th Marines. At that time, lacking a liaison officer, and I joined their battery and served with the 1st Battalion, 26th Marines as liaison officer. Now, understanding that this interview is of a confidential nature and not showing disrespect to superior officers, I have one comment. Since I did leave Vietnam around October, of course, I was not in the siege of Khe Sanh, but I attended the regimental commanders meetings, Colonel Lowndes meetings, and intelligence meetings, more or less. Well, not actually, but I mean, we started with S1, S2, S3, S4, and so on down the line. And of course, there were reports of infiltration through Laos, and not too many reports of them actually being in and around Khe Sanh themselves, except in some small groups here and there, occasionally. But this concerns tactics and a commander's decision, more or less, that I did not agree with, and to this day do not agree with, and do not believe that it should be incorporated into Marine Corps tactics. And that being that it was a command decision that only platoon-sized patrols could go out from the hills themselves, and even from Khe Sanh itself, Khe Sanh Combat Base, for a period of 1,500 meters. Now, just by logical reasoning, this leads me to believe that if a platoon going out on a daily basis, either south, north, east, or west, goes out only to a distance of 1,500 meters, then, of course, the North Vietnamese are free to roam anywhere except in a zone or a circumference of 1,500 meters from the base itself. this brings up the point that infiltration itself can be accomplished on a much larger scale because the North Vietnamese can come up closer to your position. Now, the only time that there were actually any big operations, so to speak of, big, I use the word big, meaning a company-size operation. That was the big thing with 126. There were no battalion-size operations, so to speak of, or reinforced companies. We were just reinforced with artillery, of course, and mortars. But the only time that this rule was ever broken, more or less, or violated, was when a unit had a company-size operation. In other words, if you were in a company or a company commander, you could take a unit and go pretty much throughout the entire tactical area of responsibility. That being, of course, the caisson area at the time. So this kind of limits you to the area that you're going to cover. In other words, you got a company out pretty much all the time, going in different areas, but still, you've got reconnaissance parties coming in, mainly North Vietnamese, scoping the area out, not actually maybe bringing in big size units, but they are reconning the area. They are finding out the best places that they can bed down. They are watching where the Marines are operating, what's going on actually at the combat base itself, the everyday activities of the Marines. Now, my solution is only based on what I've learned from another battalion commander, and basically that was Lieutenant Colonel Wilder, who initiated at the Rock Pile, and probably, at least I never heard of anybody else doing it, squad-size reconnaissance patrols. This was more or less, these schools were conducted by a gunnery sergeant. The individual Marines being selected from maybe various companies, or it can be just one company. They can take one squad from one company and train it as a recon unit, and have your own little recon unit right in the battalion itself, instead of relying on force recon or your regular TO Marine Corps units. So the point being this, that when we were at the Rock Pile, of course, there were no large units, at least at the time that I was at the Rock Pile, ever sighted within, say, 10,000 meters of the Rock Pile itself. Basically, I believe because the North Vietnamese knew, more than likely they knew, that we utilized recon units. And we might have two out at a time. We might have one that's 3,000 meters south of the Rock Pile. We might have one that's 7,000 meters west of the Rock Pile. These recon units were out. They were snooping and pooping. And they were looking for signs, evidence of North Vietnamese actually being in the area. And they would find it. But this is the point. They would find the evidence. Now, back at Quezon, I don't think that much evidence was uncovered. I don't see how it could have been, because the Marines weren't actually covering that much territory. And of course, the recon units, I know if I was a North Vietnamese, I would have taken advantage of the situation. I look at it from the point of view of what I would do if I was a unit commander. Like I said, I like to give credit where credit's due, and what Lieutenant Colonel Wilder initiated, I think, could be of great benefit to the Marine Corps, especially in a tactical area such as South Vietnam. Maybe not so much in a conventional sense, but at least in a tactical zone such as South Vietnam. Now, I'd like to emphasize my point that the collection of evidence around, say, Khe Sanh, evidence that the North Vietnamese were actually in the area, were infiltrating the troops into the area. I think the siege of Khe Sanh partly could have been prevented. The surrounding of the base itself could have been prevented if small units had been employed, 2, 3, even 4 at a time, depending on how much activity is in the area. Now, the big argument comes up, maybe against it, that the individual corporal or maybe a buck sergeant doesn't know that much about taking a small unit out into the sticks like that, out maybe 3,000 or 4,000 meters from the base itself. Well, of course, the selection of the corporal or sergeant or NCO in charge is going to have to be made by somebody that's competent to make a decision such as that. But from what I saw, once these Marines were taught what they were supposed to do, they did a pretty good job at it. So that kind of rebuts that argument against it. And secondly, the thing about it is, people are always worrying about maybe the unit getting lost or not doing something right, but more so they're worried about people getting killed out there. Now, I've already expressed my views on tactics. I mean, tactics in a garrison situation is nice. It's nice to get out in the field and run problems. Nobody gets hurt. But tactics in a really tactical situation means only one thing, and that is somebody's going to get hurt. Now, if you got a squad-sized patrol out there, and they're opened up on, and you got 3 or 4 Marines killed, and you got to get them out of there, well, why not utilize as much firepower as you can to get them out of there, and bring your airplanes and your artillery to rest up atop of the North Vietnamese, and have these Marines out there actually calling in the artillery. I know I'm not presenting a real good argument for it, but I firmly believe in it, that if you're going to sustain casualties, why not be on a squad-size level instead of cramming in, getting an entire company, not an entire company, but at least 50% of a company wiped out because, they were sitting there before you try to go into their position when you could have known of this in advance. That's the point that I'm trying to make. And also that the siege of Khe Sanh possibly could have been prevented if the Marines had utilized small unit patrols. It was obvious, at least from reading the newspapers, that it just seemed like all of a sudden, overnight, there were North Vietnamese all over the place around Khe Sanh. Descriptions coming back that the Khe Sanh combat base itself was completely encircled. I mean, what was the cause for it? Could it have been prevented? And if it could have been prevented, how could it have been prevented? And if it could have been prevented, then utilizing the means of how it could have been prevented, maybe we can prevent a major battle like this from occurring again. I mean, I look at it one way. There was 250 Marines killed and over 2,000 wounded. And if my suggestions are going to be of any benefit to the Marine Corps, then I feel that I'll be a better Marine if I just offer my at least opinions, if not sound decisions. Another point I'd like to make is the artillery support itself. Now, I was acting as liaison officer, and I had my forward observers out on the hills, 861 and 881, and I was kind of disturbed at times, basically because of this. That at one time, the regiment, I say regiment, meaning 26 Marines, command decision being made, at least I think it was a command decision, that only so many rounds would be utilized against the North Vietnamese with respect to the size of their unit. Now, I can't remember exactly how many rounds it was or how many volleys it was, but it was divided up into squads, platoons, and companies of the North Vietnamese. In other words, if you saw a squad out there, you could fire maybe a battery 1 on a squad. If you saw a platoon, it's a battery 2. If you saw a company, it was a battery 3. Now, this is going to kill North Vietnamese. But you're only going to kill so many. And after you kill so many, you can't kill any more. My point is this. If you got a company out there, why not just blow them up? I mean, blow them all up, and don't let one of them walk away alive. Like I say, the decision came down to limit the amount of artillery placed on enemy troops. And not actually disobeying orders, but actually not really complying with them. I told my FOs to call in the artillery as much as they wanted, and if somebody back in the regimental command group wanted to make a decision on how many rounds were to be placed on the enemy troops, then let them make it. But I wasn't going to have anybody out there amongst enemy troops risking their life and not being able to utilize the necessary amount of supporting arms. I just couldn't see it. So I just instructed my forward observers to call for what they thought they needed, and if they didn't get it, and a few Marines got killed because of it, then at least I know I wouldn't have it on my conscience for the rest of my life, and maybe somebody would. But I know for a fact that the artillery logistics support at Khe Sanh was handicapped, basically because the North Vietnamese, after July 20th, had cut off Route 9. Not actually literally cut it off, but they made it really hazardous for the Marines to go through that area. So instead of going through the area by truck convoy, the Marines utilized air support, and the artillery ammunition itself would be landed by crates via aircraft coming up from Da Nang and airdropping it just right outside the perimeter of the Khe Sanh combat base. So I know that we were handicapped as far as artillery support goes, but still, it just seems funny that when you're in a combat situation like that, and you come up face to face with Charlie, and you're instructed to kill him, well, you know, you got to have something to kill him with, and it's just it's really hard to realize, even in being in a position I am, being a captain, that something couldn't be done. At least it was done almost when it was too late, but of course that was another part of history and will remain a part of history. That's about all I have, all the highlights, more or less, of my experiences in Vietnam.
Thank you, Captain Rogers. This is Marine Interviewer Staff Sergeant John T. McDaniel from the Joint Informational Services Office, Camp Pendleton, California. This interview complies with Marine Corps Order 5750.3A.